Hello, everyone. Good morning from the USA. Good afternoon, maybe from Bahrain and the Middle East, and good evening from India. Uh, Thank you very much for being here today. I would like to introduce Professor Henry Sanoff, Chair Professor of Architecture Design, Department of Interior Design, and Washington University. So today we are going to have a talk which is part of the IIDT 2025 conference, which is the second international conference in interior in design, which was held on the 27th and 28th of January. And this session is part of the conference. The talk today is going to be Democratic Design Without Borders by the well-known Professor Henry. And now I will give the floor to the moderator of this session, Dr. Shivram from Washington University. So, Professor Shivram, please go ahead.
Yeah, hi everyone, a warm welcome to the event. Before starting the presentation, I would like to give some information about Professor Henry. Professor Henry Sanoff, AIA, Professor Emeritus of College of Design, North Carolina State University. He is well known for his published books, many books, which includes school building assessment methods, schools designed with community participation, programming and participation in architectural design, community participation in design and planning, and visual research methods in design. He's also a USA editor of Journal of Design Studies, and he is recognized as the founder of the Environmental Design Research Association, EDRA. It has completed more than 50 years, and his research has concentrated in areas of school facilities, children's environments, community arts, community revitalization, and aging population. And Professor Henry has been visiting lecturer at more than 85 institutions in the USA, and also he was a visiting scholar at the University of London. With that, Professor Henry is a huge resource for us with specialties around community participation, design programming, post-occupancy evaluation. Now I would request Professor Henry to start the presentation.
Thank you, Shiva. Hello, friends. The title, Democratic Design, is really based on a concept that comes from my early experiences working as a professional architect. And the problem was that never in any of the projects that I've done, any contact with who the people were that were using the environment. It was usually the chief architect, or we kind of invented a scenario of who might be occupying the buildings, whether it's housing or children's environments. And so it occurred to me that there's something missing in design education. Typically, whether it's interior design or architecture, the focus of education is really to pass a license exam or to be a professional. All the courses are oriented in that direction. Consequently, as designers, we establish a language that we can communicate with each other and everybody understands what we're talking about. We talk about space all the time, but for most people, space is up there. We talk about relationships all the time, but for most people, relationships is mother, father, cousin. So we tend to use a language that we understand, but nobody else does. Most people cannot understand drawings. You can explain it, and yes, they can read the titles, but they don't understand the concept of trade-offs because they've never been involved in that process. And so consequently, my focus was really not only to recognize the paying client in education, but the non-paying client, the people who use the environment. Now, I always like to start with some kind of theoretical premise. And so I was looking for other ways of describing the non-paying client. And I began to explore political science and the concept of democracy. Now, there are two kinds of democracies from the literature. There's a representative democracy, and that's where we vote for somebody that represents our viewpoint. It could happen in the university. We have a committee meeting and vote. It could happen in elections. Now, one of the problems with democratic representation is that there are winners and losers. Now, you expect in a public election there might be losers, but when it comes down to the local level, working with clients, even in university and faculty meetings, you don't want losers because losers sometimes sabotage the situation or don't really contribute at their best. And so consequently, the issue of participation became very important. And the other kind of democracy is called participatory democracy. Now, oh, okay. Participatory democracy is basically people affected by design decisions should be involved in the process of making those decisions. Now, interestingly enough, democratic design was written about 25 years ago. It's been translated into Polish, and about 10 years ago, it was translated into Russian. And I'll talk about that in a little while. Next. It's particularly interesting that in the last few years, I'm sure you're all familiar with IKEA. IKEA talks about democratic design in terms of how they're trying to reach a wide range of people with their designs. Next, please. Next, please. Now, within the framework of participation, we need to develop different techniques because a lot of the methods that we've used are really communicating to each other. And so I developed the concept of games, design games. And design games are interesting as a concept because when you hear the word design, it sounds like fun. And quite typically, when people talk about a planning process, it's not fun. It's painful, actually. And so the idea was really to look at some of the principles of design games, but really relate it to some of the ideas that exist within the design and planning field. So it started with the idea of a game having pieces in a box. Next, please. Next, please. And one of the problems with the box and the pieces, you lose the pieces. So consequently, I had to kind of reestablish the ideas where I can travel any place in the world without carrying boxes with me. Now, one of the important aspects about the game is that it's an opportunity for groups of people to come together and talk about the issues. And it doesn't make any difference if it's housing, if it's a school, if it's healthcare facilities. The idea is that everybody should have an equal opportunity to participate. So that typically groups need to be between 4 and 6 people. Now, there are basic theoretical principles underlying the concept of the group. First, with any game, there has to be rules. And the rules are there needs to be consensus at every stage along the process, which means that voting is not allowed. Now, consensus is based on the notion of values clarification. Like, we all have different beliefs. We all have different values. And so, even though we have good friends that we've known for many, many years, we may not really understand their values. So the first step in the process is there needs to be basically a set of objectives. And if it's a school, then I prepare typical objectives coming out of the educational literature. And it doesn't make any difference whether they're relative or not, but it's statements coming from the educational literature. And then the rules then suggest that each person has to select one or two or three of those educational goals that they think are important. And then the group has to discuss it and agree. And in this process of discussion, they're clarifying their values. And this is the most important part. They get to really know each other. So school teachers, for example, could have been teaching in the same school for years, but they really don't know each other that well. So this is a typical example of a group of people, and I'll explain what's going on. Next, please. I'm going to start with a few projects in different parts of the world. When I talk about crossing borders, it means that the concept of games is appropriate for any language. And it's most popular in Japan, but we'll get to that next. About 30 years ago, I had a fellowship to teach at the University of Sydney. And I got a letter requesting that I would come a week earlier because there was a small town in the northern part of Australia that needed help desperately. Next, please. Next. The town is called Bangalore. It's a town in the northern part near the recreation areas of Australia. And people from the town contacted me and asked if I'd come a few days earlier to help them because they were afraid that a new highway was being planned. And this town was very close to the resort area, and people were coming for one day to stop off, and that's what kept the town alive. So because I had done some work with small towns before, they felt maybe I could help, and they would arrange a group of experts in the town to work with me. And I suggested, no, I'll bring my own team. So I contacted the University of Sydney School of Architecture and said, please send me 4 students, any 4 students, as long as they can bring a pencil and paper and a scale. So it was during some kind of spring break or fall break, so they had a week free. So the university paid for their train fare, which was about a 7-hour train ride. Now, the students were coming to this town of Bangalore without knowing why or who I was. Next, please. So this is kind of a very scruffy looking town, not unlike many small towns in Australia. Next, please. This is the most historic building of the town. Next, please. So the first step is really to meet with townspeople and take a walk and then bus tour around the town and the surrounding areas. Next, please. Now, the most important thing, and this is really critical for designers, design education, the tendency is always to talk about solving the problem. What is the problem? And the difficulty is that it assumes a negative approach to what you're doing. There may not be a problem, but we tend to talk about a problem as if designing something is solving a problem, but it's not. And so when you're working with a community group, it doesn't make any difference what kind of group, who the client is. If you talk about problems, you're already setting a negative attitude about the situation. It's like going to informal settlements or squatter settlements and calling it a slum. That's where people live, and slum is a derogatory statement. So I start by saying this town is beautiful. When I say the town is beautiful, people, really have a sense of pride because here's a visiting expert coming from thousands of miles away saying your town is beautiful. So that kind of encourages them to really think about it carefully and wanting to participate in doing something. Next, please. Now, in any kind of a project, it's always important to involve young people. We never think about young people as having any kind of, expertise. And the assumption is that you have to send young people to school so they have a lot of information, which I don't believe is the case at all. But young people are important because they understand the situations very well. They are the experts, because young people tend to know their town better than older people because they walk around, they go to school, they move around, they have friends. The other thing that's important, really important, I don't know how many of you who are listening have children, but if you have a child in school, when the child comes home, we always ask, you have a good day? What did you do today? And they usually say, oh, it's the same old thing. So you never get any information because it is the same old thing. When you have young people, it could be 8, 9, 10, 11 years old, when they're involved in thinking about their town, building models, doing drawings, they come home and they tell their parents, we did something really exciting today. We were redesigning our town. And all of a sudden, the parents become aware that something is happening. So the children are a messenger to tell parents that something is happening. Next, please. So the children are doing drawings and doing models, really about the kinds of things that they like about the town, the kinds of things that should be involved in the town. And they feel important because they're dealing with kind of critical issues that are really being discussed by their parents. Next, please. So the next step is to interview townspeople. So I spent the evening talking to the students that were coming, just outlining what we're going to do. First, we have to talk to people and find out what their perceptions are, what they like about the town, what should be included in the town. And we want to interview as many people as we can. And so we set up interviews with townspeople. If people had shops that they couldn't leave, we would go to visit with them. And it was just not a questionnaire, just a casual conversation. What's special about the town? What do you like about the town? What would you like to see changed? Next, please. Next. So the first step is a workshop. And I called it Pride in Place because this is an important concept because you want to instill the sense of pride, even though it's a kind of scruffy looking place. So the workshop is important because that brings all the townspeople together. Next, please. And they could talk to each other in groups. Now, it was interesting too because some of the people from the town and some were farmers from the outlying rural area. So they really didn't know many of the townspeople very well. So this was like a bowling club. And there were groups of 4, 5, 6 people in a group. And there were a whole series of issues like goals for the town, what kinds of activities could be created to satisfy the goals. And the idea is to get them to think about and talk about the town and what it could be. Next, please. Now, in Australia, unlike many other places, there's always a pitcher of beer at every table. Sometimes that helps to stimulate the conversation. So people are going through the whole process of making individual choices. What are the objectives for the future of the town? And then they have to agree. It's always the same steps: establish objectives, consensus agreement, look at activities to implement the objectives, consensus agreement. There has to be consensus agreement at every stage along the way. Now, many times people will say, well, we've known each other for 30 years. We know each other by heart. And they start talking and they start arguing already because they really don't know each other that well. Next, please. Next. Next. So a set of objectives are established through consensus, and then the kinds of implementation strategies. Next, please. So there were several features that emerged as a critical thing to be solved. The town entrance. So the idea here was to take a picture of the town and then for the students to do a sketch. Now, it didn't make any difference how good the sketch was because some of the students were second year, third year, some could draw well. It didn't make any difference. The idea was to look at the town in a different way, look at a photograph and then talk about what it could be like. Next, please. The entrance. I think I missed the slide. We missed one slide, but if you recall the entrance before, this is what the entrance looks now. Because during the, yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's the town entrance. That's what it looked like 30 years ago. Next, please. As a result of the workshop, this is what it looks like now. Now, one of the underlying issues of a lot of the things that I do is, how do we know what we know? We all kind of make things, we design things, but how do we know how effective those ideas are and how those products are? So you have to go back somehow and find out what's been happening. And that's what I've been doing for a number of years, going back, which not only tells me about the solution, but tells me about the methods that we've used, how effective. Because, as designers, you can't be there all the time. And in many instances, it takes sometimes 10, 20 years. So how do we know what's been happening over that period of time? And during the workshop, during the discussion of the town entrance, one of the women said, I have 20 palm trees that I'd like to donate for the entrance of the town. And that's why the town has changed so dramatically. Next, please. Next. This was a vacant building that I think at one point might have been an art gallery. And a lot of the townspeople felt that this was important. It was a sense of identity because there were local artists in the town. They had no place to exhibit their work. As tourists could come through, it would be an opportunity for tourists to see the work, buy paintings. Next, please. Next. That's what it looks like today. So the thing that's interesting, I spent 4 days with students in this town. And we established a kind of strategy where they would have to complete all of these projects by themselves. Now, I don't go back to Australia to take pictures, but I use Google Maps if I can remember where these are located. Next, please. Next. Downtown. One of the aspects of downtown, typically in Australian towns, there was something called a veranda, like a balcony that was extended. Now, over the years, there's always a tendency to look ahead and not look back. So they tore down the verandas. And when we came and started talking about what was important in the downtown, they said the verandas, but they're all gone. So then the concern was, how do we kind of reconnect with the past and rebuild verandas? Next, please. This was about 3 months after. Next, please. 20 years later. Next, please. Next. I just took that picture last week. This is a booming town, and it was done by the residents themselves. Next, please. I don't know how many of you read Japanese, but this is the town of Nano in the northern part of Japan. Now, the design games book that I wrote was translated into Japanese, and it's become very popular. basically because Japanese people play games. It's part of the culture, playing games. So a group came about 30 years ago to North Carolina from Tokyo to talk to me about games and play games. And so within the last 20 years, there have been 2 conferences in Japan called Design Games Conference. Over 400 people from Japan came to those conferences, either to present a game that they played in the community or a game to play at the conference. And I've been to Japan many times, and generally, I only stay for 3 days. My wife used to complain if I traveled too much, that she said, well, 5 days is the maximum that I can stay away. So that meant 2 days for travel, and 3 days I have to figure out how to do a project. So I guess word got around in Japan that I can do projects in 3 days. So I was contacted by the mayor of this town. It's located on a bay, and the town was growing rapidly, and the recreation area was not satisfactory, needed to be expanded. So they talked about filling part of the bay, and the town had planners and designers making proposals. And over a period of 2 years, the town planners and architects were making proposals, and they were all rejected by the community. 2 years. So the mayor contacted me, and he heard that I do magic in 3 days. I said, fine, I'll come. But the first thing, before I come, you have to arrange for a boat ride for young people to ride around the bay, to have a sense of what it might look like if a part of the bay was filled in, but also to make sure that young people were involved. Next, please. So 2 boats were arranged. Next, please. And teachers and the students rode around the boats, and they talked about, we didn't have the perimeter yet, but we had a sense of where the recreation area might be and where the infill might be. Again, if the young people are involved, they're going to tell their parents, and it's a very effective way of making people aware of what's going to happen. Partially because in any kind of recreation area, there's public investment and private investment. And the only way you get people to invest their own money is if they're part of the process. Next, please. So somehow the Japan Times, which is a newspaper that everybody in Japan reads, 150 million people, and there was an announcement that I was going to do a workshop in this particular town. So about 30 people emerged that first day to observe. And I said, no observations. We need people that work. So if anybody wants to remain, they can work for the next 3 days, which they did. Next, please. Next. And there were 2 things had to be done. First, to generate a list of possible objectives for recreation area. And so there were some people from the town, there were some people coming from different parts of Japan, just generating possible objectives. And the reason for this, if you initially ask a group of people, what do you think is important? You get what's on top of their mind. But if you generate a whole list of possible objectives, they may see things that are important that they never thought about before. That's why it's always necessary to generate a whole list of hypothetical objectives for them to choose and reject or change. So there's one group of people generating objectives. Next, please. Next. Then there was another group of people developing graphic symbols, the size of a postage stamp. And the symbols represent every possible recreation activity that could occur on the site. Next, please. Then the symbols have to be done in scale. And then we had to do an estimate, if it was a camping area or a picnic area, about how large of space would that require for a town of 60 or 70,000 people. So there are all the symbols of the possible recreation areas, plus the number of postage stamps that would be necessary when they started doing planning for the site. And you'll see that in a minute. Next, please. Next. So here, for example, there'd be a camping area, and those little symbols represent how large that would be when they actually locate those activities on a site plan. So this is really the stuff that they have to cut out and paste. Next, please. Then I met with a group of local people to establish the perimeter, footprint of how large the recreation area would be. Next, please. And then I met with the young people. There were about 20 or more middle school, high school students to explain the whole process to them. Next, please. Then we had a workshop. It was a Sunday morning adjacent to the area where there was the recreation area would be a shopping mall. And so we had quite a large turnout of about 75 people coming to the workshop. Next, please. Next. So they're working in teams, 6 people. Typically, the young people would work with themselves, which is much better, so they wouldn't be intimidated by older people. Next, please. Next. And you can begin to see they go through the process of identifying objectives for recreation, the activities, then they cut out the activities and locate them on the site, and they keep moving them around. Now, the most important concept that they learned from this is the concept of trade-offs. If you try to explain trade-off, you can define it, but people may not understand it until they're actually involved in the process of making trade-offs. And what happens, the groups select all the activities, but they don't all fit on the site. So they have to make trade-offs. They have to decide which is the most important. And so here they're really beginning to understand the whole concept of planning. Planning is always about trade-offs. Next, please. Next. That's the women's group. They already did a 3-dimensional model of the recreation area. Next, please. Each group then presented their work. Now, I don't know if you can see, but they're all smiling faces. If you've ever been to a planning meeting, nobody comes out with smiling faces. They're always coming out with a grim face because they weren't happy. They voted and they didn't get their vote wasn't recognized. They're all happy. They all agreed. They didn't know each other. And typically, when I show pictures like this to other communities, they always comment that there are always smiling faces. And that's the concept of game. Game means fun. Next, please. Next. Then about 300 or 400 people came to the auditorium that afternoon. This was a one-day process. Morning, a few hours, lunch, and then afternoon. In the afternoon, I explained the process to the entire group. Now, I explained in English, and there were translators translating in Japanese. And then one team member described the process. Next, please. Next. They described their solution. And they're all very similar because there weren't that many different activities, but they may have located them in different places. Now, There was one team of young people, young boys, so that an 11-year-old boy explained his plan. And then he pointed to one area, He pointed to one area and he said, "We want this to be a shaded area where our fathers could sit and drink beer." Well, the whole audience exploded. They were hysterical because no adult would ever said we need a place where we can drink beer, but young people are totally uninhibited. As a result, the mayor said this was absolutely unbelievable. First, the mayor said, and mayors in Japan are very powerful people. The mayor said, "I learned something very important. Why it's important to involve young people in any kind of a process that we go through." He also realized that there was a sense of ownership. Next, please. Next. This was a kind of a summary of all the ideas, and they were, very similar. But the thing that was interesting is that everybody in town recognized, or everybody who participated in the gaming session recognized their ideas. They weren't that different, but the sense of ownership is absolutely crucial. Next, please. Within 1 year, it was built. It took 2 years to discuss it, and in 3 hours, it was solved. And next, please. Then next. And then the townspeople expanded it and had a picnic area adjacent to it. So here again, the townspeople, that sense of ownership was important because they were able to expand that whole recreation area and feel comfortable doing it. And it's well designed. Next, please. Next. Next. Yeah. Okay. This is a school. Now, in many countries, public schools generally have basic requirements: school sizes, classroom sizes, number of children, middle school, elementary school, high school. This was an existing school in a small town that it was a 2-story school. It had problems because of the stairs and accessibility issues, and it couldn't be maintained or remodeled. And the decision was to build a new school. So there were the community. It was kind of interesting because they told the district supervisors, education supervisors, that they wanted to be involved in the process. So I was the only one that they could call that they knew that would know how to do that. Next, please. Next. Next. Well, the front page of the newspaper is "School designed with kids in mind." Now, this is important. It's very rare that you see any kind of a building appear on the front page of a newspaper unless it's really terrible. I'll show you the next page later. Next, please. Next. Now, one of the concepts that I use, especially with young people, parents and teachers, is what I call a wish poem, where everybody completes the phrase, "I wish my school." And this is the 6th grade, which is 11-year-old students, and they talk about the things that they wish for. Next, please. Then the teacher, it's a summary. All the students participated, all the teachers and parents as well. And each one states their wishes. And the teachers and the parents always wished for a beautiful school, one that would be nationally recognized. Now, this is important because many times designers have to argue, for something that looks a little bit different than the conventional school. Nonetheless, next, please. Next. The parents also want a school that's nationally recognized. Now, there was okay, next. There's a teacher's workshop. Now, the teacher's workshop was important because we wanted the teachers to be involved and understand what was happening in the whole process of creating a school building. And we wanted the teachers to look at education objectives, the kinds of activities that would satisfy those objectives, and the kinds of places that would be appropriate for those activities. Next, please. Next. So from the educational literature, I have a whole list of objectives, and each person would select 3 or 4, then the group has to agree by consensus. So in this, now, see, the teachers could be language arts, could be history, could be social studies. Didn't make any difference what the subject was. The principles are about education, how students learn. So they're talking about objectives. Now, this is important too because teachers tend to think about objectives for the subject that they're teaching. They're not talking about the subject. They're talking about educational principles. Next, please. Then they have to match teaching methods to those objectives. And some of the teachers would say, well, I learned about this when I was a student in the university. That was like 25 years ago, but they forgot. Next. And then there were a whole series of photographs. And for each teaching method, they had to select the place that would be most appropriate. So sometimes it would be a place in the community, and they would look at maybe a seminar area, and then we say, well, this is too big or this is too small. So they begin to look at the places, and none of the places perfectly matched the methods. Consciously, they weren't supposed to match, so that people could look at it and begin to think about how they need to be changed to satisfy their objectives. Next, please. And here again, always going through, 4 or 5 people together. Next, please. The last workshop is the space planning workshop. Now, the teachers complained that the school building that they came from was facing north and south. So in this part of the country, south got lots of sun, north got no sun. So half the building was too warm, while the other one was too cold. So they wanted a building where all the classrooms faced south, so that all the classrooms would have the same sun. And the workshop, next please. Mostly parents, some teachers. It was a local architect. Next, please. They spent 2 hours and they couldn't do it. Next, please. They displayed their work and they all said, we can't get it to work where all the classrooms face south. And they said, you're the architect, you do it. Now, this is important because nobody knows what an architect does. Nobody knows what a designer does. It's a mystery. But when people experience it, they try to do it themselves. They realize they can't do it. Even though they got all the pieces and they know the direction, they can't do it. And this is so powerfully important because what happens, 2 things, a sense of trust between the professional and the user, and the fact that they respect the contribution of the knowledge of the designer. And this is so important because, again, nobody knows what designers do. It happens in an office. But when people do it themselves, they realize how difficult it is. You know, we spend 4 years, 5 years, 6 years to teach young people some basic principles of design. So we can't expect overnight people to understand it. But when they experience it in 2 hours, it's very powerful. Next, please. So we took all the stuff to the office and looked at all those solutions. Next, please. And I did a sketch where all the classrooms face south. Next, please. Then we hung up the sheets with the plan all around the school so the teachers could make comments. On the left, teachers would make comments of what they liked, what they disliked. Next, please. So then we finally developed a plan, all the classrooms facing south, but something else was included that was important. When we got people, all the people in the community involved, they were local artists. And the local artists would sometimes do classes with the teachers. But the idea emerged in the process that the school could be a place where local artists could exhibit their work as well. So it's not only small things, the exercise they can do with teachers. Next, please. So we developed, there were 3 towers in the building, and each tower was at the intersection of spaces, and the towers were the exhibition areas of the school. Next, please. You can see some of the paintings. Next, please. Now, if you remember the first picture, the children's drawings had towers. The artists then, with the children, over the past 25 years, were doing murals in the school, in the walls. This is a tree, and each hand is a different student or group of students. Next, please. Next. This is where the students have their own houses, and they put their names on it. This was done about 25 years ago. Now, there are students who went to school here when they were 7, 8, 9 years old. They're married now. They have children. They bring their children to the school to show their children where their parents' name was on the wall. That sense of identity is so important. Next, please. Next. Okay, kids get user-friendly school. Now you can barely see the towers. Next, please. Next. When the school was completed, the children said, we designed that school because their drawings had towers. And over the 25 years, people said it was the children who designed that school. The sense of ownership is so important. Now, in the United States, there's always a problem in many cities, vandalism. Schools get vandalized. This is a community school. And there's a waiting list of about 50 teachers who want to teach in the school. The community invested in building a swimming pool adjacent to the school for the students as well as for the community. So here the concept of the school as a center of a community is so important. And the only way it happens is if the people in the community get involved. But it has a life of its own because people don't necessarily leave this town, they stay there. And young people have this sense of connection to the school building. Next, please. This is a small project. I started a PhD program about 20 years ago. It's called Community Design. It was focusing on research and mostly quantitative research. But the important ingredient was working in a community. And this is a project we did with 2 schools. It was a campus of elementary school, middle school, high school. And 2 schools required an addition, 6 classroom addition. So I brought together a couple of architects from the office, former students, and a couple of PhD students, just to see how a community workshop actually occurs. Now, underlying this is the criticism that has always occurred for decades about participation. If you have people involved, they can only tell you what they've experienced. So there's no innovation. And this is a critical issue. And I try to deal with this all the time. This is a small example just to show that that's not the case. Next, please. Oh, this is a typical classroom. I mean, this would be any place in the United States, probably any place in the world. So it was important for the teachers. There was a 6 classroom addition being proposed. And it was important for the teachers to evaluate their own classroom, to see what are the positive attributes and negative, just so in the design of a new classroom, we don't repeat the same problems. Next, please. Next. So we developed a rating scale where teachers would go around and rate the appearance, the climate, all the features of a classroom that would be influential in the design of a new classrooms. So it's a kind of rediscovery for teachers. Next, please. So in schools, when I do a workshop, all the teachers get involved because the principal says all the teachers should be involved, and they always listen to the principal. So all the teachers get involved. Now, the issue then is 6 classroom addition to the existing school building. Next, please. So I developed scenarios of basically 2 pairs of classrooms. Classrooms in the States tend to be about 25 students per classroom, and each one of these clusters of 50 students. And the idea was to look at different kinds of shapes, different kinds of arrangements. But the important thing was to look at the educational criteria and which of these arrangements satisfied the educational criteria best. Next, please. Teachers are going through it. Now, the teachers had never looked at floor plans before, but there was a list of criteria and they were helping each other. Next, please. Next. Next. Now, every group agreed that the L-shaped classroom was the best. And the criteria, I don't know if you can see the criteria. That was the criteria for the selection process. So none of the teachers had ever experienced an L-shaped classroom. And each group agreed that this was appropriate. Now, there's a theory, it's called Sanoff's theory, behind the L-shaped classroom. One of the problems, I think many countries face this problem, student performance, student grades, there's always comparisons from one school to another. Testing, and I'm not a believer in tests, but I felt that the most critical issue in schools is not testing, it's motivation. And motivation, based on everything that I've read, in schools, is based on student-teacher relationship. I call it STIP, student-teacher participatory interaction. If teachers spend more time talking to students in the classroom, the student motivation is higher. Teachers remember student names. Teachers remember what the students are doing. So the critical thing is to keep teachers moving around the classroom. In a conventional rectangular classroom, even though there may be tables, teachers tend to stay in one place. With an L-shaped classroom, there's no one place that the teachers could stay. They're forced to move around. And in the process of moving around, they spend more time with students. Well, this has become so successful that after this, a colleague of mine designed a school based on L-shaped classrooms. Next, please. Oh, here we're just sitting around doing sketches. Next, please. Then we did a workshop with the teachers. We had 6 classrooms to design. Next, please. So we developed 2 alternatives. I guess the dark brown represents how the 6 classrooms would connect with the existing school building. And they all selected B. Now, these groups were working independently by themselves, and every group selected B. Next, please. That was scheme B, L-shaped classrooms. Next, please. And so it was built. Now, one of the other important things with, all teachers dislike corridors, long corridors, and they always complain about that. So with the L shape, there's no long corridor. Next, please. There are breakout spaces, and the students could spill out outside the classroom and do activities in the hallway as well. So the corridor is more than a corridor. It's another activity space. Next, please. Next. And it's hard to photograph L-shaped places, but what was interesting, all the teachers in the school, I don't know, 60 teachers, wanted to be in these classrooms. There were only 6 classrooms. So in order to avoid conflict, the principal said, well, we'll put the kindergarten here. Nobody would question the kindergarten being there. Next, please. So I'd like to, I think I'm getting to close now. This is back to Russia. This was before the war in Russia, maybe 8 or 10 years ago. Design Games was translated by architects in Russia. And I suggested that they don't look for a publisher. It was called democratic design, but it wasn't. They didn't use the word democratic, and they told me it's a Russian word similar to democratic, because they wouldn't use the word democratic in Russia. You can understand why. So it's really about democratic design. And basically, many of the case studies that I've developed over time. So I suggested that the 2 young people that did the translation market themselves. Just go around to schools and explain what's going on. Next, please. I did some workshops in Russia. Next, please. The students would go to different schools of architecture and lecture about the book. The book became very popular. It was regarded by the National Institute of Architectural Education in Russia, which controls all the 70-odd schools. They said that this was one of the 7 books required for all architecture students, which was in Russia. I mean, it's mind-boggling, right? So they've been going around, and I've been to Kazakhstan. They speak Russian there, and they're using the book there as well. Next, please. So they've been doing workshops in Russia, and this is before the war. Now, they don't have the spaces big enough for all the people that want to participate in the workshops. Now, and the way it worked is that they build a lot of high-rise buildings in Russia, but they don't do anything with the ground around it. And so when this is the young woman who did the translation, when she began talking to the people, they said, there's nothing around. You know, we have children. It doesn't make any difference how cold it is. We need, you know, a place for recreation. And so what they did is convince the local authorities of the province to begin to look at outdoor areas around high-rise buildings. And so they've been doing this. I think they slowed down during the war. But the numbers of people that they're getting are mind-boggling. In Russia, they talk about social planning, but it's really the government that's doing the planning, and they call it social planning. But here, the people are doing it themselves, and the responses are absolutely fantastic. Next, please. Next. And they got it built, and this has been going on, you know, up until the war. It's been lots of projects like this, and they've been winning international awards as a result. Next, please. Oh yeah, a few years ago, I did some workshops in Kuwait, but it was a Society of Engineers who invited me. They wanted to know more about participation. What does it mean? Not that they were going to do anything about it, they just wanted to know. And engineers are very powerful in many countries. Next, please. So a lot of these projects are in a recent book. The first book was called Democratic Design. This is really going back to those projects and looking at what they're like now. And I call it participatory environmental design. But it's available through Amazon. I try to use Amazon because books now are very expensive, and Amazon is kind of reasonable. Participatory environmental design. Nice book in color. Next, please. I'd like to close with a poem that I wrote. A design game is like a kiss, interesting to read about, but much more interesting to participate in. And those that do tend to repeat the experience. Thank you. If there are questions, I'm available.
Professor, can I stop the presentation?
Yes.
Yeah, I would request if there are any questions. First of all, thank you so much, Professor Henry, for all this detailed presentation for us. It was a fantastic work.
Thank you.
Yeah, it might have took a lot of efforts for you to do the exercise so hands-on, taking the students out of the studio, exposing them with the live project, participating with the local people. I understand how hectic the task would be, but then we are so honored to be there here to attend your lecture today.
Thank you.
And that is a fantastic opportunity for probably each of us, if we can take it ahead for a translation, if Professor Henry agrees. In other local languages also, we can promote that collaboratively. Any other words? Dr. May, I would request Dr. May to close the session.
Any other questions?
Yeah, please, questions, people, if you have any questions, because the people here are not all from design background. So maybe we have Dr. Faisal, and we have the IT team. So maybe you can pose the question in terms of how to use the different types of, let's say, teaching methods in your place. Okay, let's learn from design, and maybe
yes.
If you have any question in this relation, please.
Let me answer the question, because what I've shown you is basically what I teach.
Yes.
For 35 years, there are two things. I don't like design education the way it's taught. And it doesn't make any difference if it's interior design, architecture, whatever, because it's based on competition.
Yeah.
And it's based on grades.
Mm.
And there are good students and there are bad students.
Mm.
I don't believe that. Good students. There's good faculty and good and bad faculty. But if we look at the principles of education, students learn more from each other than they do from a teacher because they spend a lot of time together. And since I started teaching, just in North Carolina, 40 years, no student in the studio, and have been mostly graduate studios, sometimes undergraduate studios, no student works by themselves. Every project is at least 2 students. All the projects are real projects because people contact me. They don't have money. It could be a town revitalization or reusing an old vacant building, a wide range of different kinds of projects. Students have to learn how to talk to future clients. So if they're working on real projects, they have to learn how to do workshops. They have to learn how to present their ideas so that their parents could understand it, because most of the clients are going to be like their parents, especially if they're not designers. So over the 40 years, I've done over 250 projects with students. All the projects with 2 students, they last 1 semester, sometimes a year. And it doesn't mean that the students are going to follow what I do. Understand a lot of the important issues that professionals have to deal with. They have to know how to write a program. They have to know how to communicate in a way that people could understand what they're talking about. And the impact has been phenomenal. There are other schools have tried to imitate this, but many schools have such a tight structure that they don't have the flexibility. I mean, I started doing this, and if anybody disagreed, I'd say, I'll go someplace else. But I started winning all the awards for the work, and that the president of the university would point to the work that my students were doing as an example of the impact of the university and the community. In the United States, there's always a separation. They call it town and gown. The community is different than university. University are elitists. And once the students start working in the community, they won't remember my name or the student's name, but they will always remember the students from the School of Design did this work. And so that's why it's become important. There have been TV programs showing how the students can make a major contribution. We don't have to wait for professionals because a lot of communities can't afford to hire professionals. And we have schools all over the world filled with design students who are locked into studios when they could be working outside in the community, providing the help. You know, everybody needs some form of design help. They may not use the word design, but need some kind of spatial planning help, some kind of help. And with all the students in all the schools of design, that could be certainly a major contribution. And what's the most interesting part, it was when the project is completed, the students presented at the community. They may do a presentation, not a pinup, a major presentation at the College of Design in an auditorium. But the major presentation is at the community. And then there'll be a letter to the university officials or in the newspaper. The students did such a great job, they all deserve an A. This happens all the time.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Very, very interesting. Maybe anyone else have any other question? Do you have any other questions, please? Dr. Faisal, do you have any question?
Well, thank you very much, Professor Henry. I was listening to the part which you started by showing your work presented to students. But I like your answer to the last question, how to deal with the students, how to communicate with the students. Always students learn by doing, and this is part of probably interior design students, because their assignments, their projects should be done by themselves. And this is truly very true. And other than that, I don't have any comments. Just to thank you, Prof, for being with us today, and hopefully, inshallah, to meet you in the near future, physically or online. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Aisha and Fatma, my colleagues from the Department of Design. So if you have any questions, Aisha and Fatma.
Well, I don't have a question, but I just wanted to say thank you so much, Professor, for your presentation. I thought it was insightful, especially for me right now, as like I just started to teach, so I thought it was insightful to see how I go about right now for my studio classes, and I just wanted to say thank you so much.
You're quite welcome. Good luck.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, Fatma, go ahead.
Just to say thank you. It was really a very important lecture. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you.
I would like to add something actually. It's not a question, it's another way of saying thank you. But you know, nowadays we all talk about humanized design, centered design, but we don't really know how to do it in reality. So from your lecture, I learned that maybe we know that we can do, for example, teaching by games or teaching by playing or teaching by doing. But after listening to you, I thought of why don't we really keep more involvement of the people from the society? Because they are our stakeholders. If they like the place and they make it, they will be more aware of it and
Yeah.
they will take care of it.
Sure.
So it's
Sure.
more of engagement. So I really like I was just writing points throughout the presentation, and I said, we are doing a lot of things as a designers, but yet we don't really realize how values the things that we are doing, because we need to shape it, we need to frame it, and we need people like you to put us on the right place, really.
Well, I think the problem, of course, is that because designers are locked in the university, nobody knows what they do.
Yeah.
So if you look at the salaries of designers, they're very low. Many young people drop out of the profession because they could get, for example, the corporate world right now is talking about design thinking. But there's nothing happening in the design professions about design thinking. Now, in the United States, if you have a telephone call to a lawyer, the lawyer charges a fee for the phone call. Now, nobody values designers, and so the salaries are low. You know, people are always looking for something for nothing. In the United States, there are some areas of the state and the country where architects cut fees for competition. Now, I would argue, charge a higher fee and do a better service. One short story. There's an ice cream. Some years ago, there was a lot of competition in the United States between people who were making ice cream. And all the ice cream in the supermarket was in a box. And there was one family that has been making ice cream for years, and they were worried because the competition was so great. They had a very small factory, and their son back from he was studying business at Harvard, and he said, "Well, you have to compete, but when you compete, you have to organize, and develop a different kind of product." So while all the ice cream was sold in boxes, they had a round container. Now all the ice cream at the time had the name of the company. What they did, they gave it a name, Häagen-Dazs. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything. But everybody remembered the name, Häagen-Dazs.
Yeah.
And everybody saw the round container, and they charged more money. And they made a fortune. In 1 year, they sold the company for several $1 million. I've suggested that to architects that they provide, building spaces go through changes. Office buildings, office spaces go through changes all the time. And typically, they hire maintenance people to do the changes. And I was suggesting to architects is to provide a service, not only a fee for the work, but to come back every 6 months to review the changes. Like you go to a doctor and you come back for a checkup every 6 months or a year, to provide a kind of service that continues with the life of the project. So it's not, when you're finished, you disappear, because all buildings, interiors especially, go through dramatic changes, and the changes are terrible because it's mostly maintenance people going through making the changes.
Yeah.
Insulation problems, noise problems, furniture layout problems, all of them, they're terrible. So I think it's important in the education of designers to talk about continuing the process, continuing a contract, continuing a relationship with clients, and what kind of service can you offer as designers to make it worth people investing in it.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally agree. And this will take us to the post-occupancy evaluation of spaces.
Right. The other thing that's interesting, there was a chancellor in the university some years ago who would always say, like, all the students with an A average stand up. And he would say, all the students that have an architecture degree stand. So maybe 75 or 100 students. And he would say, you see all those people sitting there? They're going to be your clients. And so what I've started to do years ago is to teach design in the university to non-design students. Because they are the future clients. And they know nothing about design. So it doesn't have to be interior, it doesn't have to be architecture. It's just some design thinking.
Yeah.
Design methods. I mean, it's so important. So you really have to educate your future clients, not only your own students.
Totally agree.
But what's interesting, if you look at the medical profession, a couple hundred years ago, doctors were described as witches. And in the United States, they were burned, they were killed, until there was research in biology, physiology, and it became medical science. They were valued. Now, doctors are writing books, there's websites. No matter what your problem is, you could go to the web and find out a whole range of different kinds of solutions and answers.
Yeah.
Designers don't do that. Designers make picture books. Now, that's not what people need. So, the whole idea of communicating what skills designers have that are of value so people could understand it.
Yeah.
And it's absolutely crucial. So it's not only education inside, it's education outside also. And it's writing. Writing for design people is actually more important than the time you spend designing, because everything you do in life is about writing. If you work in an office, you have to learn how to write proposals. And the things that I've seen designers write is absolutely awful. So, so writing is part of the process of education too.
Yeah, totally agree. Totally agree. But nowadays, with all the AI and all of these advances, maybe some people are thinking that they are replacing us, but this is another nightmare that we need another session to speak about, sir.
That's a nightmare. I have friends, teachers in different parts of the world that are leaving teaching because, you know, if you've seen a student produce something using AI, you know they didn't do it, but you can't prove it. In the sciences, they have software that can prove it. But in education, and teachers are frustrated, you know, and they'll meet, a group of teachers will meet, and they say, oh yeah, it's not his work or her work, but they can't prove it. So what do?
We have to allow it, and then deal how to interpret the work. Maybe by questioning or something.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
But
that's the big frustration at the moment. And I know a few very, very good teachers that PhDs left teaching. They said it's too frustrating. They can't deal with it. And, you know, students pick up on everything quickly, faster than teachers do. So it is critical.
It's very frustrating.
But I have one solution. Whatever you do, ask the students to write in the room, in the classroom. Write a page, write 2 pages.
They don't even bring a pen nowadays.
Well, hand out pens, no cell phones. Just
cell phones,
give them a pen.
And these pens, but sometimes without batteries. So there is even no use of these pens nowadays.
But if they have to write it in the room.
Yeah. We used to do that. We used to do that in our lives.
Of course.
But nowadays we cannot like change the generation because everyone is like, they're attacking us. Sir, it is very nice talking to you. The chat will never end. The seminar will never end.
Right.
And speaking, and on the behalf of Ahliya University and Boxing University, we learned a lot from your session today. And you gave us hope that AI will not replace us, although it's attacking us. But AI will not replace us. We still create the place for the people. We make the life. My father passed away, and he is always saying, I'm the creator. My father is an architect. But we say, because we are Muslims, like creator is only God. But now I believe that we are creators of life, creators of happiness, creators of people. So thank you very much for creating a beautiful image for us. At least we will remember your talk, and we will apply it in our teaching sessions. If we are IT people or mathematicians or designers or architects. Thank you very much.
Would you send me a copy of this presentation?
Of course, it will be all there on YouTube. Our IT team will add it to our playlist because there is a playlist that is related for the conference. Okay, and you were one of the keynote speakers of that conference, so it will be in that playlist, inshallah, and I will share with you the link.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate
Thank you very much, sir.
Good to see you.
And we will have to tell you bye-bye.
Right. Bye-bye.
And take care. Take a good care of yourself. Stay safe. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.